Hello. It's Dr. Fred again, and welcome to another unbelievable episode of Welcome to Humanity, the podcast. So let's just get started, with this conversation. So one of the things, and you all have heard me say this before, if you've heard any of the episodes, one of the things that happens for me, and one of the magic of doing podcasts, is that you get to just not only invite great people to have a conversation with you, but you can be pretty reliant that they might say yes. And once they say yes, then you have an opportunity to have a true blue conversation with somebody that you might admire or respect or appreciate, or simply just wonder about, like, what makes them tick, what makes them beautiful, what makes them live a life of such an extraordinary nature. Like, what is their contribution? What is the place in the world that they find themselves? What are the things that make their heart sing? All those questions. And, as a podcaster, what it takes is having a podcast that works and then creating an invitation and having that invitation accepted. And what I've been finding is that people are pretty interested in sharing what's important to them. So today is, without question, no exception to that. And we're in for a treat. I have an opportunity today to introduce this listenership, wherever you're coming from, while you're listening to an extraordinary soul of a human being. Michelle Jenkins and I met, actually, we didn't meet physically, but we met many times in a phone conversation a few years ago when I was buzzing around possibly doing a growth and development course that she was what would you say, Michelle? You were kind of like a collaborator in making sure that the course went well.
Right, the program manager for the course.
Yeah, the manager. And so Michelle and I met there, and it was clear at that time that I was dealing with a rock star, a major earthly player, and maybe even otherworldly. So then Michelle and I have run into each other a number of times since then, and most recently there's been some breakthroughs in Michelle's life that I was made aware of. So there's an opportunity to invite Michelle, you, to our podcast, the Welcome to Humanity podcast, and now is that time and now is that space. So Michelle Jenkins, welcome to Humanity.
Well, thank you. I feel so welcomed.
Yeah.
I am so a part of that.
Yeah.
I really appreciate being here. I'm excited about sharing, like, my purpose, the place in the world that I find myself, like you said.
Yeah.
I definitely have found myself in a really extraordinary place where my experience is that I've been in labor with this for 50 years and finally gave birth. And I gave birth in a way that was just unbeknownst to me. It was the universe, like, pretty much handing me something that had been there all along. And I'll begin to share with you exactly, what I'm speaking of. Just a few months ago, my son, he's 42 years old, he's an executive at a Fortune 500 company, very successful. People love him. He's just an extraordinary human being. And he calls me and says, Mom, my boss wants to, have a conversation with you. He wants to set up having an article written about me in the newsletter at our job. And, he wants to talk to you and sort of get the backstory. And his boss calls me up. We have this amazing conversation. We connect like we had known each other for years. And we begin to exchange stories about my son, like him showing up, like, in a way that, typically young men don't show up, particularly at a company. And he shared with me how my son is the most reliable person. Like, if there's ever any problems, that he would know who to call. He'd call my son. My son would manage, like, really difficult situations with ease. And he would get callbacks from customers from this company saying this gentleman's, like, extraordinary. And he calls me and he says, I want to get the backstory. Like, what did you do to cause this young man to become who he is? And for me, I was, like, beyond flattered, beyond being a proud mother. And I immediately, began to share, like, that my son's company wants to do an article about him. And I posted it on a particular page on Facebook. And within, like, a half an hour, there were over 4,000 women that reached out to me. And these are all African-American women. And they were saying things like, I'm in tears right now. There's hope. Do you have a blog? Do you have a book available? Can you coach me? And it was a lot coming at me at a very short period of time. And I began to get emotional because I could see in the moment that this is, like, why I'm here. This is the thing that I do well. This is the thing that I've like made the biggest impact, on in my life. And being involved with personal development for 41 years doesn't hurt at all. I get to bring something really powerful to the conversation of, transforming the narrative with young men of color. So the title of my book that I actually began to write is MOBB in Action, and MOBB stands for Mothers of Black Boys. MOBB in Action, and the subtitle is Unleashing the Brilliance of Boys of Color. And it's been a full circle for me. I, years ago, created a project where I had a forum with young African-American men, with very young African-American boys, having dialogue and them being inspired because, I did it inside of, I say what's missing in that whole world is that being in the trenches, having these transformational conversations with these young boys early on and having them really get who they are in the world. That's what I did for my son. This happened when my son was in kindergarten. And I realized that I've done things that almost took for granted that people are not doing, that I provided for my son. And now he's elevated. And this has been going on since he was a young boy. When this all happened, it started happening with the acknowledgments about, him and myself, that I had flashbacks looking back like, wow, I started kindergarten. I had conversations with him about being responsible for his life. And I would have conversations when he was in 5th grade, 6th grade about when he got to college, not if you're going to go, but when you get there. So there were these empowering conversations early on, where I would speak about practices of integrity, impeccability, and accountability and intentionality with him. And, he's become this just extraordinary person that I like a whole lot and I love to pieces, so it's been a journey. And, my it'll be published in September. And this all happened relatively fast. So if I told you this is only 3 months in the making, where I've done podcasts and, I've sold like over 80 copies of a book that hasn't been published yet, you might like be a little like startled, like, wow. So this is really like my baby. It's my accountability in the world. Like it's up to me to alter, not for just this generation now, but for generations to come. I'm not doing this for my grandchildren. I'm doing it for my great, great, great grandchildren, where the narrative will be duplicated and it'll be duplicated on and on, so that, what we've experienced, with the George Floyd situation and all these really like awful, situations, that we shift everything. We shift all of it.
So thank you for that great introduction. Is the book more a storyline of what you did? Is it instructions for other mothers of Black boys, or is it an opportunity to just marvel in the growth and development of your spectacular offspring? Is it who's the readership? Is it something for even us white men to learn from? Or, what's really here? Yeah.
So this book, it's a coaching opportunity. It's an informative opportunity. There's stories of examples of what I've done. There's opportunities to do exercises in the book, between the mentor, which could be a man, it could be a white man, it could be a Black man, it could be a woman, it could be anybody, because, young people are young people. And my purpose in delivering this is to really impact, the way in which young boys are listened to. I'm talking getting down on your knees, like nose to nose conversations when they're really young, so that they're being heard, and they can take on like these principles I shared of like being someone of integrity, like having those conversations to enforce that when they're young, so that, it becomes who they are. So my book is for anyone and everyone. I actually had a chance to read parts of my book to a book group that I'm a part of. And I happen to be the only African American in the book group. And I read a part of my book, and one of the women, she said, wow, I want to get that book for my grandson, and my book isn't to leave anyone out. It's actually to include everyone. It's my niche is my African-American boys. That's just the niche, but anyone can benefit from the book. And I write it in a way that anyone reading it will get that, like I'm present to the audience, in other words.
Yeah. So what is it that people don't know that upon reading your book, they now would know and be able to, or be naturally able to incorporate in their lives such that we can make turns for the better for the world in front of us?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I love that I have like the perfect answer for that. My son, when he was young, I took on something with him, and I took it on to really empower him. And I've shared this with several people, and they actually got immense value, from listening to like what I put in place for him in his life. It's about consequences, like young people and dealing with consequences. And that's every young child, that we raise. And I took on having him realize consequences before an incident happened, and I could read a little portion of the book where I actually unfold that. Yeah.
Sure.
So it's chapter 2, and the title is Consequences. And I have, as women of color, we know more than any other mom that the uncertainty, insecurity, fear, and concern with regard to our boys being out on the streets or out in the world. It not only takes conversations to uplift him, but sharing the unsurmountable possibility of consequences of one's actions, which are critical conversations to keep in place. What I instilled in Nick in his early years was clarity regarding consequences. I recall him getting his license at 16 years old, which was the case in Virginia. Like most parents, I had every possible scenario that could go wrong floating around in my head. I just wanted him to be safe. He and I discussed his curfew, but what I did was I put together a contract for him regarding usage and upkeep of his vehicle. The contract spelled out everything that was possibly possible. For instance, he knew to not have strangers in his car, no paraphernalia, agreement to pay a very small portion of his auto insurance, doing his chores, bathing Chi-Chi, our Chihuahua, maintaining a particular GPA, and the list went on. As he looked it over, he wasn't excited at all to sign it. What followed was simply hilarious. At that time, in 1993, I was a paralegal in the law firm. And one day, as I was sitting at my desk, Nick walked into the office to speak to one of the attorneys that I worked with about the contract. He wanted guidance on whether or not he should sign it. The attorney read it and with an extremely hesitant look turned to Nick and said, "Do not sign this contract," in a joking way. I was hysterical for the next few minutes. Imagine your 16-year-old showing up in your office with your contract to review with an attorney that you work with. Like priceless. Oh, and by the way, he signed the contract. Having a conversation about consequences up front will make the biggest difference. And I mean a conversation, not dictating. For example, he knew that if he came home past his curfew, he would walk in and just hand me the keys and walk to his room. There was no dialogue necessary. He had already agreed to the terms. This, I say, totally set him up for his future. He's currently known in his company as one of the most reliable executives. And as I write this, his company actually completed the newsletter. There's a conversation happening now, about him being vice president, which is pretty extraordinary, and you pray that the fruits of your labor will be impacted. And my journey in providing Nick would be in his best interest was the most important thing to me, and it was not the easiest at times. So that was something that really made a big difference for him.
Beautiful. This idea that there are consequences, I know it goes without saying, but the consequences are just like, well, if you do this, then this will happen. And that's not consistent with what you want. So I would suggest you not doing that, which will lead to consequences that are different from what you say you want. There's that. But there's the reverse of that too, isn't there, Michelle? There's this idea that, if you do well, if you do right, if you are your word, if you are, reliable, if you are accountable, if you are impeccable, if you do speak with integrity, if you really learn to manage situations that are with ease, that you do and do so with ease, there are consequences to those actions, and that is that you get a life that actually approaches working, like is actually getting that which you said you wanted to be. What kind of focus do we look at? Not only like stay out of trouble, there are consequences, but the opposite. If you want what you want and you truly want to live a life that's consistent with that what you want, then living a life that is not only devoid of negative things, but is fortified by being that which you say yourself to be is an opportunity to get a life that's consistent with what you want. Is that also true? Is that well said? Or what do you have to say?
Yeah. It's the practicing of all of this. Like, this is one aspect of it, but the practicing of stepping up your game, the practicing of being acknowledged for a job well done, like the practicing of bringing your best self forward and dancing in that until it becomes the norm. I've seen him, like, he's 42 years old. I've seen him go through the journey and the growth process that he got to a point in his life where he wanted to give that away. He would go into the inner city and bring young boys out into areas, colleges, places that they had never seen before, to expose them so that he could begin the process with them, like passing it on, like passing the baton to the next generation. And he's done that. And it took like the creation of the foundation of all of this, like the building of a man from a boy in all of this. And it was diligence that was put into this, like intentionality that was put into this. And, he has taken on like the teacher now. I'm learning from him now. I was his coach. I was his manager. I was his committed listener, and it turned into like a reversal of roles almost. Yeah. Which is like very, very empowering. Like, it's adult to adult, man to mom, opposed to mom to little boy. And to see that growth, there's nothing like that. There's no other accomplishment that I could equate this to.
Yeah, that's amazing. The question I think that arises, perhaps somewhat difficult to answer question, is, in the growth and development of men, and I'm pretty committed to the same line of thinking as I think like who I am is a stand for the empowerment of young men. And often I find myself working directly with this group and really being impressed with how impressionable they are, but also like what's here, the effort and the capacity to do such good in a world that is calling forth, fairly urgently, the responsibility of young men to indeed step forth and hold their own sovereignty. With all of that said, there are some who believe that in order to do that, a man, the initiations, if you look at Campbell's work or you look at some of the work of tribal initiations, these tend to be boys with their dads or boys with the other men in the village or the society. And there is a notion, at least understatedly, that really can't take place totally by a woman being a mentor for a man, even if that woman is the most amazing, loving mother of all time. So I'd really love to at least heave you that difficult question, and I imagine you've looked at this or taken this on, but can a man learn how to be a man in a real way of society without interfacing directly with good acting male mentors?
Yeah, that's so the world I swam in for so many years. And to answer, I say that it's necessary that they do have that. I remember when my son was in high school, he was a standout athlete and he had Division I university scholarship offers presented to him like from his freshman year up until his senior year. And his dad wasn't in his life, and I made requests from my community to just be there, to hear him, listen to him, have him have an outlet other than his mother to be with. I went to the clergy. I went to organizations that were affiliating with young males, and I spoke to my brothers, and nothing really came to fruition with that. And I relocated to a different state, putting him in a totally new environment. And I met someone who became his mentor. And from that point on, between that and then the military academy that he attended and then college, I was so grateful that he actually had that in his life. Mm-hmm. He had someone that could be there that way for him, because it was a challenge being alone with it. And a lot of times, when you're a single mom, which I was, you do the best you can. You do all you know to do. You follow the guidelines of what there is to do and be as a mom, and you pray for the best, and you believe. And right. I think that's the thing that really had me sustain the ability to like stay the course of that with him. And it was believing, like bold believing, like I know that I know that I know this is going to happen, because one of the things that did happen with him when in high school was he was a standout athlete, and academically his grades were sort of teetering and tottering. And by the time he was in his senior year, I had a concern about him making the grade. I said, if he misses it by a point, he could blow the opportunity. And I sat him down and we had a conversation. I wanted to have him choose and not force him into anything, but I, had him consider the possibility of entering into a military academy. And, we discussed it and he agreed to it, which I was elated about. And we go to the military academy and speak to the administrator. And I, shared with him, what I was up against, and the scholarship office were like just there waiting. And this is actually November of his senior year. And I spoke to the administrator and I asked him, if he had space in his school, and he had a waiting list, and my son ended up on the waiting list. And before I left, I asked him, I said, is there scholarship money available? They wanted $15,000 a year for him to go. And I wanted him to go for 2 years. And the administrator said, no, we don't have scholarship money. It's November. We've given it out. And I looked him in his eyes and I said, you know what? Go ahead and get him registered. Let's do the paperwork. And I had about a month to actually generate the tuition. I went home. I prayed. I wrote Oprah Winfrey, Michael Jordan, Reebok, Nike, pharmaceutical companies, lawyers, and doctors. I sent 100 letters out. And I had taken little pamphlets from the academy so I could stick them right in the letters. And within 3 weeks, I got a call from the military academy. And they said, Ms. Jenkins, I want you to know we're celebrating our 100th year anniversary. He said the alumni have been extremely generous over the years, but never in the history of the school have we had the amount of money that's come in on behalf of one student ever. Wow. He said we have well over $30,000 here for Nick to attend Fort Union Military Academy. My son ended up getting the scholarship. Getting the scholarship, and ended up on the honor roll, which was like not going to happen. Yeah. And then he ended up graduating from Wake Forest University, which is an Ivy League college. And, it's not easy to get into that school.
Not at all.
Yeah. So he had like an amazing opportunity in his life. And it took like me believing, like really having bold belief and having him get who he is.
Okay, it's a really supreme example. I'm going to sink my teeth into this one. I love it. Maybe it comes as no surprise is that when my mom passed away just a few years ago, we had nothing left between it. We were complete with each other. We had learned, certainly we've learned in our shared efforts in our growth and development work that being complete with your mother is one of the tickets to having a life that really soars. Whatever it takes is to actually have nothing between you and your mom, even if she's already passed away, is an opportunity to then go beyond that as a man and go into a life that can work in ways that otherwise might have been simply unimaginable. So for me, I feel very fortunate to have reached that space with my mom. And when you speak to the pursuit of getting your son in there anyways, there's no more scholarship money, Miss Jenkins. And right at that point, there's 98 and a half out of 100 moms are saying, darn, I'm late again, or this damn system, or why can't blah, 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 or if only blah, 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 or, if there would have been that, then, or maybe if his dad was in his life, or maybe maybe it's a racial thing, or all the many ways that you might have managed that first, pushback. There is something spectacular about actual motherliness. And I mean that, not just parenthood and not just advocacy, but motherliness of who you then became that sort of answers my previous question about the initiation. In other words, it doesn't hurt at all. And in your case, it might be, shades of things to come for people who bite into your book, to have a mom who's willing to put her life on the line for the growth and development of her son, of her male child. And in some ways, that's what I hear you doing, is that you're not, you don't stop short of writing to all the politicians and Michael and Oprah and, and people who really might be curious and interested and willing and able to respond to the request to move your son, like it takes a village to move your son into the academy that he belongs in. Now, that's one piece. Having then done that, I now again relate to your son, which is, okay, mom just did that stuff for me. The opportunity is now here for me, and even the responsibility is to perform beyond that which I otherwise might have. That by trusting your son, by investing in your son, by creating a space for your son for him to excel, he had almost no choice, Michelle, but to grow and develop in unimaginable ways because the space you created for him allowed for that growth. That is not a fatherly thing to do, typically, actually. In other words, I don't know many dads either who would have sat down and written a bunch of letters and then created the most fundraising donations in the history of the military academy. And then, just to move on, oh yeah, mom, after I graduate with honors, I'm going to go to Ivy League, Wake Forest and graduate there. And not, it's like you create the space for his excellence and he has the opportunity to be excellent in order to fill that space. And that's a motherly thing to do. I see that's motherly more than like a substitute dad. That's actually incredibly nurturing, and I honor that. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, right before you began to share that that was a motherly thing, I was present to that as I spoke it. Like in that moment when he said there's no money available, I knew no one was coming. No one was coming. And there was no space of no possibility. There was no space at all. It was totally okay. Throwing my head over the fence and believing it. It's going one way. And I tell you, the moment I said, let's get him registered, there was a way of being that nothing could have stopped the train. I was expecting it, waiting for it. What shocked me that it was one person that sent the money. I thought it would come from a bunch of people. That was the shocking part for me. But I was totally in a world of believing, like it's going to go one way for this young man. It's pretty bold and pretty daring when I think about it.
Yeah.
Like, wow, there was no space for it not to go the way I say it was going to go. Like none. That was powerful. That was really powerful place.
It is. It's really powerful and nearly unheard of. I've had an opportunity to work with a few thousand people in my years as a psychiatrist, and in my years even, prior to that, and it is almost unheard of, if not entirely unheard of, for you to be, what there is? There's advocacy for sick children, or people who are hit with unfortunate traumas, or, someone gets injured, or someone gets misused, or, someone gets a disease. And then, a lot of times society or the family might stand up for, requests for donations or requests for fund support of some nature. That's not so rare. But what is really rare here is that your son is not only not sick and ill at that point, but he's able-bodied. He's got Division I written on him. He is certainly graduating. Well, I guess it was close, but certainly graduating high school. So you're doing it for someone who is already doing well. Do you know what I mean? Things are going pretty good in the greater scheme of things. You're not desperately saving him from going down the rabbit hole. You're actually taking him from a space of nearly adequate, if not indeed adequate, to a space of extraordinary by being the stand that you are. And I think it points to who you are in the interface between Michelle Jenkins and extraordinary, so that good is fine, good is good, but that isn't what you're after with the growth and development of the legacy that you're providing for your child behind you. So you turn good into unheard of reliability, or unheard of impeccability, unheard of responsibility, and, integrity at the highest level as a way of being for your child. And it's like there's something about it not being reacting to anything. It's simply creating and responding to the beauty that you want to bring into the future of your son's growth and development. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, it totally was a creation, with no excuses and no, not being stopped by anything. It was definitely moments where situations came up that could have impacted the situation. But even before writing the letters, there was a situation. I was living in Virginia, and we lived in this town that was predominantly white. And my son had a situation that happened. And, he went to a great school. Kids are like good kids. He's driving his car. He's at the wheel. And his girlfriend's sitting next to him. And his best friend's in the back. And his girlfriend's sitting next to him. And they're on their way wherever they're going. And the young lady on my son's passenger side starts screaming and was just like in an uproar of like, something's happening here. And my son's driving like a little zigzag, looking at her like, what is going on with you? Like, what's the problem? And they all look up, and there's a guy driving next to them with a gun pointing at them, and for fun and kicks. It's the whole long story what happened with that. But it was a situation where my son was very popular. He was the number one running back in the state, on TV all the time. And this gentleman, when he was caught, said that the gun was pointed from the car to him. Someone from the car pointed the gun at him first, which was the most bizarre story. But the attorney that I worked with, I wanted to, press charges. And he said, Michelle, this is not going to be a winning game. Your son is like in the public eye. He's about to go off to college. You have this situation where it's his word against his word. And I never saw my son as angry as he was. A good kid, but was really angry. He felt totally violated, nothing he could do about it, because it was, we could have had it be his word against my son's word, and then my son's in the newspaper now, affecting his future college, so I had to humble myself and just let it go, so the journey along the way, and that wasn't the first time that something like that happened, where he was there doing his own thing, minding his own business, and there was a gun involved. Like a police officer pointed a gun at him once for no reason. No reason. So, the journey was bumpy, a total maze. I just like, it has to go one way no matter what, no matter how upset, how angry, how just having the experience of something unjust happening.
Right, exactly. And, I'm sorry about the experience. And it's a wild world that we're living in, if you haven't noticed. These days, you can always say in these difficult times, but there was never a time in our life where you couldn't start the sentence with in these difficult times. I mean, it's been difficult times the whole time, and it's just gotten a little bit more difficult. It's always, and then there's the profiling or the racism or the, him versus me, or he said, she said, that are out there that really are not even and not fair, which really makes your son's story even more interesting. So, when we look at MOBB, we're now on to the second big letter, which is the first B. So we first have, okay, what about being a mother? And I think we did a really good job of fleshing out a piece of who you are as a mother, as an extraordinary mother, not just a mother and not just a single mother of a growing Black boy, but actually a mother of extraordinary capacity to create a future for her son. So that's what we've already been through that. And now we're looking at the word, I think if you allow for it, we can look at the second word here. What does it mean to be a child growing up Black now? Then, what is in the way, or what are some of the things that are maybe not obvious, or the things that are, seemingly insurmountable, where you really have to, I know you're angry, but actually that's the way things are, and go fry your fish. There's bigger fish to fry perhaps in other arenas, and it's pitifully sad, and we're going to leave that one the way it is for now and move on to other areas. So what is it about? What is it about growing up Black in America that you'd like to kind of point out that makes that word make it to the title of your book?
Yeah. It takes focusing on the thing that's going to propel you into what you're committed to. It's the focus of that and not the focus of the other thing that's going to cause anger, upset, disappointment. And it's real. It's there every day. It's there all the time. It's there for me as an African-American woman out in the world. You could be with me out and about. You may not notice certain things happening around us, but I will notice that. And it's just a common, conversation out in the world that things will happen, but it's where you focus your attention. And it takes something. It takes something to pull away from the thing that could take you out or take you in a whole nother world. It's the constant practicing of that, until it becomes normal. And like I shared earlier about believing and instilling like positive like thoughts that are going to make the biggest impact on your, whether it's a boy or girl or whoever, on your child. Can I read something else from the chapter about what we're speaking of? Actually, it's believing, bold believing. And I have like an extraordinary practice. And I call these African-American boys kings in my book. So just so you know, if you hear kings, sure. An extraordinary practice for our kings is to constantly remind them of who they are. When I say this, I mean having them know that nothing is impossible. Lean into their dreams and know that they are their dreams. There will come a time when you will no longer be their teacher, but will become their coach, and then their admirer, and then their student. The support from a mom or mentor is unmeasurable. Think about what it meant to you being supported. I'm speaking to you right now as someone who is in the position of being the source of who your king is and who he becomes. It may be you operating alone or you supporting a structure already in place. My word to you is to be all you can be inside of whatever you are dealing with. When you see it before you see it, that is the beginning of a powerful existence. The vision I'm talking about has nothing to do with sight. This will take you generating this. When I say generating, I mean stepping up and putting yourself into a mental space of what's possible. Your surroundings may not be aligned with what you are out to create in your life, and that has nothing to do with anything. Your vision and actions will make the biggest difference in your journey when raising, teaching, supporting, or coaching your king. Your vision is something you see beyond your challenges, slip-ups, misconceptions, or your mood, and nothing will get in the way of that. I invite you to have a vision that is huge, out of any box you or your king have ever been put in. I know for myself, when I become highly intentional about a situation, things begin to happen one after the other. Oh, it can occur surprisingly and even shocking in a good way. But stay your ground no matter what happens. Allow yourself to enter into this space and enjoy the ride. The stepping into something and taking it on powerfully is exactly what I want for you and your king. Not looking into the past or focusing on the future, but operating in the present at each and every moment. What you create now in the present will create the future you are intending for. It is all one step at a time. What I do and invite you to do is highlight this section as a reminder to take this on as a way of living. Being in the present is a present. This Beautiful. Is all you really have.
Really, really beautiful. Thank you, Michelle. Really, really, really great. And it really hits home. And I'm sure it hit home for anyone who's listening. And that's the kind of thing that once you hear it, it can have an impact on your life downstream from that forever. So I truly appreciate you contributing that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I knew when I was using even the B word, even the word black, that I was already in some ways being edgy. And like the only reason that allowed me to do that is because after all, it's what the B stands for in the book. So I'm like, okay, but wait a minute. It's got to be okay to use that. It's like there's a sensitivity here.
I get it. Yes.
That is so important to recognize for people who aren't in the conversation. So I want to make sure that I don't get misconstrued or that, somehow I don't inadvertently say, think, or believe something that could be seen as being profiling or seen as being racist or seen as being privileged or, things that are just sometimes in the water that we swim in as the fish.
Yes, I totally get your world. I totally do get your world.
Mm-hmm.
I had the fortunate opportunity of being in a book group. The title of the book was Me and White Supremacy. Well, actually, it was Me and My White Supremacy. And I was invited to be part of this book group on Facebook. We discussed the book. We were reading the book. And I was the only African American there. And I really got the opportunity to hear, like, in a whole new way what you're sharing, like how that is, for someone that's not Black. Like that, you're walking on eggshells. Should I say this? Should I say that? Am I saying the right thing? Did that offend you? And this podcast is not about that, but, and I could go into the whole world of what happened in that group. But, I brought it up because going back to my book about being in the trenches, like if you and I get into the trenches, I'd be committed that would disappear for you. So you'd get to be with me as a human being, and it wouldn't even come up as a conversation. Because the community that we're from, that I know you from, that's not even like a thing. Like It's not even like a conversation. It's like we're so grounded in being human that we almost have to remember, oh, yeah, I'm black. Oh, yeah, you're white. Like it's not even a conversation that's like in the way. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be in the way. And in that group, we distinguished that and really got to a place where, we all almost became one, mm-hmm. different color marbles in the pile, but we became one.
It's fascinating. And so, I like the little bit that we have fleshed out that B word too now, because I think there's something really, it's true. It can disappear. Now the next, it can disappear or it can be just recognized and integrated. Maybe that's a better way to look at it. It's like, it isn't like you don't know, you forgot. Is she white or black? Is he white? It's like, no, but it's just not a feature or a factor.
Right.
It's in a way of communication.
Right. It's not a way of communication.
So let's look at the next B, the last B of this title. And we start looking at boy. And as far as I'm concerned about the word boy also, by the way, is a little bit loaded.
Listen, I had that going on right in the book. And I gave it up.
Yeah, like it's a little loaded. Like, I can't be spitting out that word boy. It actually has a representative connotation that we need to be aware of.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so there's that. And so let's take away that. If we take away the slang nature of using the word boy and all the things that might have represented had I used it in the wrong context, and let's just assume that we're not going to do that, then we're looking at a word called boy, which says two things. It says man persuasion. It says, male persuasion. And then it also says young, younger than the younger.
Right.
So how about that word? And what is it to be young instead of old? And what is it to be male rather than female that, really creates the niche that your book is aiming at or aiming about? Right.
It's interesting that you brought that up because I, as a black woman myself, dealt with that. Like when I said boys of color, like how would black people even have that be heard? And I got to a place where I said, wow, society has us all twisted up in a knot with this word. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I'm using the word and like you defined it, it's a small male child. It's a little kid. It's like, okay, we call it boy. If it's a white boy, a black boy, or an Indian boy, like they're boys. And I gave up all the concerns I had about it. And I said, I'm just going to free flow and say what I, want to say in my book and just have it be okay. Mm-hmm. I just gave it up. And if someone approaches me about it, I'll be totally up to having dialogue about it.
Right.
Totally. I'll totally be generous with listening with what they have to say. It wouldn't be a battle of any sort, but it would be like, I'd be open to discuss how they hear that, what it means to them because I'm clear for me what it is for me as I represent my book here.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we start looking at, I'm looking something up real quick. Yeah, that's right. I was sure that was true. So Richard Wright's book called Black Boy. And, we read that book I was lucky enough to be in a course where someone thought that book should be in our regular writing. It was a truly extraordinary book, as I recall, though I don't remember many of the details. And then, there's so even the combination of black boy, it's something, it isn't like, Michelle, again, excuse us, but it isn't like you named the book Mamas of Black Boys.
Right.
You could have.
Anything I wanted to do, right?
You really could have, right? Or, it could have been. And that would have had an entirely new.
Yeah. And, that's what it's about. Like people being open to talk about it, to say, mamas of black, to be open. Like I did a podcast and the host said to me, I noticed in your subtitle, you said boys of color, but in the title you had black boys, but then it was boys of color. And, I was so ready for that, to have dialogue with her. I never, like planned dialogue or had anything written out about that. But, I shared with her, I did that purposely. I don't want to leave anybody out in the creation of this and make it available to everyone. And I said that boys of color could be any boy. It could be an Indian boy. It could be a Spanish boy. It could be a Mexican boy. They're boys of color, would be inclusive. And I'm not leaving anyone out. Like you could buy the book and have it like work for you in your life too. It's just my niche that I chose to speak from.
Yeah, it's interesting. So each of the terms in the MOBB have sort of variable, but all of us think we know what those terms are. I guess that's my point. Like you say, mothers of black boys. I'm like, I know what a mother is. I know what black is. I know what boys are. I should be able to put those three words together, create some ideas, and then be interested enough to, to read the book. And as we look at each of the three terms, we see that each of them really do mean something. Like who you are really is a mother. And then who your son is, or who this book is about, is really about being a mother of black boy and being a mother of Afro-American young men and being a mama of Afro-American, kids or, like you can, and each of these things really come with a different flair, right? If we would say mothers of American young men, that would still cover the same population. Right. I mean, it would be over inclusive,
right?
But it would be like, oh yeah, they would fall. Everyone that's in your book would fall into that category. And so it's so interesting that we are in these times where the level of trepidation, I noticed something. You use the word black up there and you use the word boys of color there.
Right.
And you use the word Afro-American there. And you use,
black person or African descent, black person. Yeah. Right. It's like,
And all of them have a twinge to it, like, is that okay? Is that okay? Did I hurt your feelings? Did I just get disregarded? And am I going to be ostracized am I going to be profiled for having, had the audacity to use that term? It's like, our language is so important, Michelle, isn't it? Like what to do and how to language this. Is this addressed at some level in your book as well?
Let's see. Is it addressed to that degree? My focus is really not that, I'm open to have those conversations, but my focus is really about like impacting these young people and having them leave like a legacy. Because I think this is going to go on forever. This whole like black, white, mob, African American, black person, African. And it probably will have some additional terms at some point too.
Yeah, probably. Yep. Interesting. Yeah. So it sounds like you're pointing more towards the experience and then the greater intention of the future that we're creating for these young men.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And leaving something with the mothers that can't find their way, like, providing something to them so they can pass the baton. And these young boys my son, he has a son. Now it's like he gets to pass this torch now and give everything he's gotten to his son. And his son will do the same, and it'll go on and on.
That's awesome. That is really great. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing and really for this vulnerable contribution and conversation. I wonder, can you tell our listeners how they can get the book or maybe even follow you or get in contact with you? Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what I'm doing today is the first 10 people that email me will get a free book. How about that?
That's wild. That's great. Thank you.
So, I'll say the email address. It's mobbin@gmail.com. That's MOBBNIN action, ACTION @gmail.com. In the subject line, you want to put book giveaway. And again, the first 10 people, again, that's mobbinaction@gmail.com. MOBB. That stands for Mothers of Black Boys, MOBBNIN action, ACTION @gmail.com. And the subject line, book giveaway. And if you want to purchase the book, you can send it to the exact same email. That's mobbinaction@gmail.com. And in the subject line, you can just indicate purchase book. And what I'll do, upon the launch, I'll send you a link to Amazon.
Okay. That's awesome. Thank you very much. That's beautiful. And is there anything else, any other way that people might want to follow you or, speak to you, or is that that's where they should address their writing or their concerns? Or is there any kind of social media you'd like to talk about, or anything else where if someone wanted to really stand next to you or learn from you or maybe contribute or collaborate with you, how would they find you?
They would find me on mobbinaction@gmail.com right now. That's where they'll find me. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Michelle.
Do we have time for one more thing I wanted to put in? And this is like kind of closing up and really having you all get a sense of like my real purpose of what I'm up to here. One of the things I've taken on, and this is right from my book, in my life, is that what I do today isn't about me. It's about what I leave behind with the intention of leaving a legacy for my grands, great-grands, and great-great-great-grands, and so on. As a people, we have done much inside of race relations. We've done work to impact the justice system. We've marched. We've picketed. We've done demonstrations. We've had laws changed. We've impacted prison reform. And I could go on. I too have done that work. And what I see missing, as I said before, is being in the trenches, up close and personal, engaging in transformational conversations. I'm talking about having these conversations with the intention for young people to be heard, into future generations. And I said that purposely, to be heard into future generations. The transformation of the human spirit is what alters how life goes. We operate on top of so much, meaning we have our own personal struggles that get in the way of our personal dreams. It's almost impossible to do the real work in our lives unless we interrupt the dialogue going on in our heads and in the heads of our kings. I'm committed that we alter how we see ourselves and how the world sees us. We all have powers we haven't tapped into yet. Whether you know it or not, there's a part of you that hasn't been realized. How you reveal these powers is through dialogue, and believe me, I am not discounting the overwhelming obstacles that we face as people of color. With the work done internally and a stand from those in position to uplift our kings, what we leave behind will alter forever the existence of what it looks like to be a man of color. My intention is to have you, and I mean you, live and operate inside of a new paradigm and live a life of freedom, power, and self-expression. In turn, we collaborate inside of this new paradigm and transform the educational system. We impact the judicial system. We alter what public health looks like and have prison reform statistically turn around. And thank you for listening.
Really, really great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for sharing sort of the spark that created it and the 42 years it really created, if not even longer than that, all that's here. And congratulations for who your son has become and your impact and your openness for allowing for that level of creation and for the legacy in the future of all them who come in the downline of his presence, including his own child. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes, you are very welcome. Thank you for having me, Fred.
My pleasure. Thank you. And folks, wasn't that awesome? I'm really, really, really enjoying it. Thank you so much for entertaining and being with us. We have had a great time. I so hope that you have. It's these kinds of conversations that made the world turn. And I don't know about you, but I actually am a different person on the back edge of this conversation than I was when we came in. And there's like new openings or reminders of who we get to be in the world and who we get to be for others, who we get to be for the kids that are coming in behind us, who we get to be for kids of different races or different colors or, different. And then who we get to be for people of the same races and the same color, and who we get to be when we're men and who we get to be when we're women, and how we, try to make sense of what it really means to be a human being. So I'm left with my favorite statement at this podcast, which is welcome to humanity, y'all. And it's really, really been a pleasure and continues to be a pleasure to be with you on these conversations. So Michelle Jenkins, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a terrific additive to the course of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. It's been an honor to be with you. We wish you well. And again, thank you for being so open, vulnerable, and conscious in who you are as a woman, who you are as a mother, who you are as a person, and who you are as a human being and a friend. So thanks, Michelle Jenkins.
No, thank you.
You're welcome. And Bye for now, y'all. Have a beautiful life. If it's not going well, it will be soon. Welcome to humanity.